we are going to listen to Mr. Ranjith Kalyani. He's a research scholar at Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in IIT Bombay. He has submitted his PhD thesis, which is a sociological analysis of environmentalism in Kerala. And his working interest is developing sociological methods to look into the environmental debate suitable for Indian context. Welcome, Ranjit. Welcome to English department. Welcome to Research Work. Over to you.
Hey, am I audible and visible?
You are audible but not visible.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine now. Good.
Okay. Thank you, Department of English, University of Calicut, for having me here for this this presentation. And special thanks to Nazreen for your continuous conversations and coordinating the logistics. Actually, this is part of a methodology paper that I am working right now. So I'm just trying to present, in fact, the significance of the paper that I am working on right now. As the title indicates, I'm just trying to understand, like environment as an artifact, as a cultural artifact. Cultural artifact is not just the object. Through the object, you are making sense of the social and cultural world that is connected with that artifact. In that way, how can we make sense of a kind of a social and cultural being of human population through making sense of their representation of the environment? So, in a way, this is a kind of a reciprocal and mutual thing. Like, the society is producing the environment, and that particular way of production is also defining the social and communal element of that human population. So in that way, it's a kind of a reciprocal thing. It's a mutual thing. So actually, environmentalism, or what we understand as environmentalism, as a dominant debate that emerged in the Western world. By Western world, I mean the Western Europe and North America in the 60s and 70s. Environmentalism is basically, now we understand that it is not succeeding to address, most pressing environmental issues that the world is facing right now. Like we see different kinds of criticism emerging from different fields, that are leveled against the way the environmentalism has been shaped up in the Western world in the 70s. So I'm not much, just trying to bring sociology into that debate, and how to, how can we have different understanding of the environmental debates. So environmental sociology is a discipline that is really advanced in Europe and in the US, but in different other parts of the world also. But in the Indian context, it is a kind of an emerging discipline. And an issue with this discipline in India is that, most of the time, environmental sociologists in India, take the environmental expressions as expressed by the scientists for granted, without critically looking into the making of the environmental claims. So this paper is just trying to develop a methodology to look the environmental debates as a cultural artifact. Even what is available to us as environment are often kind of a scientized landscape or an aesthetic landscape. So our point is, I mean, like in an environmental sociology point of view, even a scientized landscape is also could be understood as a cultural landscape, where science is also a kind of a culture. So in that way, this kind of an approach would help to, have some fresh insights about this So this is, I'm just trying to give to present an outline of this kind of a method. I mean, why do we need this kind of different kinds of methodology? Especially, why do we need sociology to making sense of the environmental debate? Uh, So as I said, the presentation will have three sections. In the first section, we'll discuss, the way environmental debates have been shaped up in the Western world, in the Western Europe and North America in the 60s and 70s, and some of the internal contradictions environmental debates had, since its inception, and also, like how it slipped out of the hands of the environmentalists and how it, in effect, to make it so crude, how it failed to address most pressing environmental issues that the world is facing right now. In second section, we will quickly map some of the conceptual criticism that have been leveled against the mainstream notion of environmentalism since 1990s, and like how are these criticisms, try to understand the environmental debates, or what kind of human nature relationships have been proposed by these criticisms, etc. And in the third section, we will have a discussion about, bringing sociology into this debate. Especially, I mean, I'm trying to depend three scholars' work who are working in the European context. I'm just trying to understand, like, how do we take some insights from the work of these three people? Three people are Bruno Latour, Klaus Seder, and Ingvar Full-Bluthorn. We will discuss their work in the last. How do we take some inspiration from their work to look at the Indian context? So this is the structure of the presentation. So when we talk about environmentalism, like that has been shaped up, as I just mentioned, in the 60s and 70s. It is a kind of a corpus of heterogeneous, scientific and social narratives coming together, to forge the core of our belief that the Earth's ecosystem, or the environmental, the natural environment is in danger. It is under threat, and we as human being as a large, as a single category, as a horizontal category, is responsible for this this threat. This is the basic understanding of what we understand as environmentalism that has been shaped up in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. And so we can, consider it as a kind of an ideological, awakening, or a set of movements, or a way of, seeing the world in a different way, and so on. So a very important, a very key aspect of this environmentalism debate is that, like, unlike other socio-political movements, environmentalism, it is very much dependent on the science or scientific explanation of the world, or scientists' advice. And also, like, this environmentalism of the 60s and 70s is also often referred as scientific environmentalism. Like, majorly, the science explanations, like, as we understand, as we know, science, like, we have different disciplines of science, and like they have different epistemologies of looking at the natural world. You have physics, chemistry, and so on. Especially life sciences, like, I mean, the science of the life sciences were hugely contributed to the shaping of environmentalism. And also in the same period, in the 70s, basically, we see, like, two other way of looking at the world that has been, like, we may call it as ecosystem ecology and global ecology. So ecosystem ecology, because ecology itself is a different disciplinary orientation, and it has a different epistemological foundation that understands the world as an as a connectedness of, living and non-living things. So the other natural science making sense of the world is like that connectivity is not there, and so the ecologists believe that if you want to make sense of the natural world in a better way, you should study the interconnectedness. So ecosystem ecology has been introduced by late 70s and basically by Eugene Odom and others. And in the same way, like they look at the relationship between the biotic and abiotic components in an ecosystem as a system. And also the global ecology theories also emerged at the same time, almost the same time, and that look at the Earth, the globe's ecosystem and how it is under threat. And also the same time, like what we now, it's a popular phrase, what we call as Gaia hypothesis is also elaborated. That's, that in a way says that the human life in the world, in this world, is possible because of this interconnectedness of living and non-living things, or different living things, and so on. So, so ecology by the end of 70s is turning to be, it is established as a very, very strong science discipline, and it's very authoritative and authentic discipline has been established by 70s. And environmental movements or environmentalism have hugely take inspiration from this new way of looking at the world. I mean, new science disciplines of ecology. And so another important aspect is also, like, it is not only about a different methodology that ecologies adopt, but also they familiarize a few concepts. For instance, like ecosystem surveys or ecosystem or carrying capacity. These kinds of concepts are becoming so popular, and also like these concepts, unlike, for instance, we take the concept in physics, for instance, velocity. So velocity gives us a sense of what that concept is. But in a concept, in this a concept like ecosystem service or carrying capacity, that gives a different understanding about the nature of the environmental threat or the ecological threat. In that way, this concept has got an agentive function to perform in our understanding of the natural world. Like, so carrying capacity, like how much human population can a landscape carry, kind of thing. So so all these contributed to the shaping up of what we understood as environmentalism. At the same time, the world is experiencing a series of environmental issues also, like for instance, like the consumption of energy and resources are rapidly increasing, and the world is seeing new levels of pollution and new sources of pollution. And waste, different kinds of waste are produced, and the biodiversity or the ecosystem destruction, and these kinds of issues the world are generally facing. And the world, people are making sense of these kinds of issues. And also there are very specific incidents also have contributed to the shaping up of, to the diffusion of what we understand as environmentalism. Like for instance, the nuclear tragedies, like both in the capitalist world and in the socialist world in the USSR, or also like the side effects of the use of pesticides, fertilizers, detergents, and so on. And also at the same time, we see the Vietnam War, for instance, like, and how US napalmed the Vietnam. All these specific incidents also contributed to the popularization of, or to the diffusion of what is understood as environmentalism. And we see a series of books, best-selling books. People are bringing out books on this, like for instance, Small is Beautiful by Michael Schumacher, or Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, or the Limits to Growth report. These kinds of books and publications are coming, and we see a series of people's collectives and NGOs are shaping up, like Earth Liberation Front or Greenpeace or Friends of Earth or WWF. And a series of them are being formed, and they also perform a very key role in the international political and social arena. But one issue to be addressed is that, all these actors had very different kinds of understanding about the environmental crisis. They were not a singular uniform way of understanding the environmental crisis. Also, they had the same difference about the consequence of the environmental crisis. However, all these differences were, presented under the broad umbrella of environmentalism. So there was that kind of a consensus, and it was all these things, all these strands shared a common wisdom, and it was popularized as environmentalism in the rest of the world. So actually, there are scholars who describe this, as a environmentalism as a, in a way, an extension of the Western Romantic tradition, for instance. And also, as we discussed, it also had a very positivist, rationalist, scientific way of understanding the world is also there. And along with that, we also see what we loosely call as the deep ecology tradition that believe in the intrinsic value of nature. So, like all these three categories, ecologically different categories, these are made differently. But all these came together and formed what we know now understand as environmentalism. Like uh, uh, see the deep ecology tradition or deep ecologists believe in, like, they take an ecocentric or a biocentric ethical perspective, and they believe that we have to listen to nature and know nature, like in a, like we are in a with a tint of spirituality. That doesn't give much importance to a rationalist or positivist science. Whereas you see a different, altogether an opposite way of doing the same thing by scientists. Also, we see romantic portrayal of, or aesthetic portrayal of the environment. That is also altogether a different thing. Uh, Also, this way of, one way there is a science way of understanding environment, and an opposite romantic way of making sense of environment. Actually, it is also connected with, like it is also, if you look at the genealogy of this way of diffusion of environmentalism, it is also related with how colonial sciences were diffused to the colonized world in the 19th century, by the mid 19th century, which understood, the colonized world, which almost like this propagation of sciences almost negated or denied the existence of any agentive role of the population in the colonized world. And so it incorporates kind of a very, very pantheistic or a very, paternalistic view about the colonized world. So there are also studies, or there are also theories that say that environmentalism also carries that tradition that considers the non-Western world as, as a place of, like very naive, innocent, docile people live. And in fact, these traditions also was really backed up with very sound, rich, philosophy traditions. Like, we would see, like, for instance, how, if transcendentalist philosophy contributed to the deep ecology tradition. For instance, like the work of people like John Muir or Henry David Thoreau has really contributed to the deep ecology perspective of environmental debate. In the same way, like we see a few romantic thinkers, for instance, like Rousseau or Goethe, their work is contributing to the romantic portrayal of the environment. And also we see the entire science regime also like lining up with the, with the scientific environment, or the scientific understanding of the environment, and the desire to exercise power over the environment is also coming together in the same way. So these contradictions are there even in the very making of what we understand as environmentalism, at least conceptually. And so now I think we, all of us are, one of the context of we having this talk now is the 15th birth, 15th annual celebration of the Stockholm Conference that happened in 1972. This is one of the incidents where this debate is reaching into the table of some, official political, space, and it also, decided to work collectively towards some kind of universal values that are globally accepted rules and blueprints for global ecosystem protection. Actually, these environmental concerns, as defined by the Stockholm Conference, that entered international debate, and very soon it rapidly climbed up the ladder of shared priorities to gain a prominent role in the global political agenda. And that tradition, like now, it's like it is not about NGOs, it is not about people's movement, it is not about collectives, it is not even about science. Of course, science is there, but it is about some international actors who are dealing this officially in their official capacity. And Stockholm Conference, in fact, helped very easy diffusion of environmentalism to the rest of the world. For instance, like one of the stories we are familiar with is Indira Gandhi's speech in Stockholm Conference, and she returned to India, and also one of the first environmental movements in Kerala, like Silent Valley movement, is also inspired from the Stockholm Conference. Indira Gandhi is also inspired from the Stockholm Conference, and this commonness of Stockholm Conference, in fact, helped to have a very effective dialogue between the Silent Valley campaigners and Indira Gandhi in that way. So even in a place in Kerala, like the Stockholm Conference, the influence of Stockholm Conference is really huge. So in that way, it helped in the diffusion of environmentalism. And by 80s, it is by in 87, I think I remember, this Bretland report is released, and so one of the new concepts that has been introduced in this report was sustainable development. So those who are scholarly criticizing mainstream environmentalism about its weakness in handling the environmental crisis now points to this introduction of the sustainable development paradigm in Bretland report. So after this, in a way, environmentalism has completely lost its its critical, its radical edge, and now it's kind of after a sustainable development also it evoked a consensus among the people that it is possible to do the business as usual, but you should have a you have to generate a feeling that you have done something for the environment, that kind of. So for instance, you can extract groundwater how much you want, but you just have to put a label of plant, tree, or preserve nature in your pet bottle. In that way, or you just have to, you can lead a life that is really leaving huge carbon footprint, but you just have to switch off your lights and fans for 1 hour in a year. This kind of very loose and very vague and very ineffective ways of environmental thinking has been starting from this idea of sustainable development. And because now it is kind of a generalized kind of a concept, and it is one is also, it could attract a very broad consensus, but it is very ambiguous and it is very general. And this generality and ambiguity have made it very difficult to operationalize, or if you have to plan up something, if you have to make some very concrete decisions, it's like this concept is not useful at all. And even these days, at least in the academic debates, sustainable development is a very, very less fashionable expression. It's only in the UN agencies and other NGOs are using this right now. And also it is used as a euphemism for growth. Now you cannot say growth with the conference you had 20 years back, but you can talk about sustainable development. But by 80s, because of the introduction of the sustainable development and what is now known as ecological modernization theory, that says that even ecological values or ecological protection has got some economic aspects. So you don't have to do anything structurally, you don't have to do anything politically, you just have to do some kind of technical thing so that you can continue also science has a way out for the ecological crisis. So, so this is crudely what we understand as ecological modernization, and now it's like a series of summits are convened. Like we have a Rio de Janeiro summit and Johannesburg summit. Then in 2012 we had a Rio 20 summit, and also a series of hundreds of declarations and protocols are introduced. And there is a new thing called green diplomacy. It's a new concept of international relations. All these things are emerging after the sustainable development paradigm has been introduced, and also the environmental debates are also helping to contribute particular regimes, environmental regimes. For instance, like new ministries for environment, new laws for environment, new different institutions for environment. So it has been turned to a different kind of an ideological form, and that also then the world has believed that it is also influencing the other political, other ideological, foundations. For instance, like sometimes, like even both the liberal and socialist camps were influenced by what is now we call as environmentalism. Like, and however, the 70s environmentalism were critical of both the U.S. capitalist economies and the USSR's, the erstwhile USSR socialist economy. So the environmentalists believed that both were equally damaging to the nature. But later on, it got a shape of like it started, leaning towards a left liberal political spectrum. Like, for people like Andrew Dobson are asserting the environmentalist spin towards the left spectrum, especially after, like, in the 70s, we see, like Western democracy, like, a coordination of European green and radical parties. And so they started entering into the parliament of different European countries. So, and they started, making environmental noises in the parliament. And because of their influence, the liberal camp also started endorsing the environmental principles. For instance, like, a classic example of this is like, Margaret Thatcher in 1982 says that environmentalism is one of the least priority for her out of her hundreds priorities, and it is not a significant thing to be discussed. But within some 5-6 years, she changes this position and she says that this is of utmost priority. Environmentalism is one of the first priorities for her government. So one issue, like if you look at her activities or what she has done for the 5-6 years, we would understand that there is nothing significant has been done for the environment. And in fact, she didn't change, but environmentalism has been changed. Like now, for 5 to 6 years, environmentalism has been turned to something that can be claimed by any, like, now we understand, like anybody, like Osama bin Laden claims that he is an environmentalist because that's why he's attacking the industrialist economy. Donald Trump claims, Obama claims, like in India, Narendra Modi claims that he's an environmentalist. So in that now, like it's kind of something that everybody can claim that they are an environmentalist. So like it is like by the 80s and 90s, people thought that, now there is a huge support for environmentalism. Everybody is talking for environment. And this is as a positive sign. But now we understand that it is kind of led the debate to a managerial attitude than more political or radical attitude. And so basically it's now there is a common understanding that this is environmental issue is something that can be adjudicated in a court or that can be dealt by the scientific establishments, or you don't need, or that can be dealt by advocacy or networking, these kinds of mechanisms. You don't need a political front for that. You don't need a radical movement for that. And in that way, like, but so this environmentalism has progressively been stripped out of the environmentalists, uh, and also at the same time we see like business houses are making the making use of this green thing, and they are finding this as an opportunity to have more business or more like green business. And also, like, for instance, they are using their this corporate CSR fund for environment and kind of thing, and what we now call as greenwashing. So uh, actually this is a set of criticism that has been basically proposed by, or that has been advocated by the scholars in the North America, the US scholars, and they call this criticism as post-environmentalism. According to them, basically environmentalists are one of the reasons for the environmental crisis. Because as there is something called environmentalism, the general public think that this is something to be handled by the environmentalists, unlike other issues. For instance, like terrorism. Terrorism is an issue that is a social issue, or like, global poverty is a social issue, whereas environmentalism is not a social issue. It is a narrow issue that can be dealt by the interest of the environmentalists. This kind of a perception has been generated because of the environmentalists. This is a criticism leveled by the post-environmentalists of the US. And also they often adopt a very small bore approach. I mean, like they if there is a problem, they are very quick to find a solution, and they present that solution to policymakers, and then that is kind of debated or so this is the way environmental things are happening in the US. This is one of the criticism by the US scholars that is understood as post-environmentalism. Actually, one issue with this criticism is that it's like they're accusing the very technical and the inability of scientists to face the environmental crisis at large. By 90s, at the same time, we see a series of other strands of environmental thinking and environmental movement emerging that are hugely inspired from basically social theories. So, we call it as like, so one is, we can call it political ecology, or, we see environmental justice movements or post-colonial environmentalism. These are some of the strands that has been formulated as a criticism of the mainstream environmental debates or mainstream environmentalism. So one commonality of these set of debates is that all these set of debates, presented a fresh appreciation of the complex human-nature relationship or human-environment relationship. So most of these people who were instrumental in this political ecology debate or similar debates were also environmentalists, but the difference is that they were not only bothered about the environmental issue, they were much bothered about the social consequence of environmental issue. So one criticism they level against environmentalism is that the environmentalists, the mainstream environmentalists, were bothered about environmental crisis as a crisis of the physical environment out there. They were not much bothered about the human consequence of that, and they were not much bothered about the human environment interaction or relationship. But the political ecology debates, in a way, foregrounds, it complicates the idea of human. Like they say that it is not, the environmental crisis is not, proportionately distributed across populations. Like it is disproportionately distributed. Certain people are turning to be, more affected by the crisis. So this kind of, basically, they understand the human population as a vertical category, not a horizontal category. So they complicate the idea of human in the human environment interaction. Actually, another difference is their understanding of science and non-science aspects of environmental crisis. So all these debates also respect the scientific claims. Also, they give value to the official science data. Also, they started, paying attention to the non-science articulations and expressions from the people who are not part of the science establishments. For instance, like different kinds of, local populations, peasants, indigenous communities, activists. So these people, their subjective experiences are also started reaching into the study table of the political ecologists. And because of that, they could, so one of the reasons for the shaping up of these debates are also about their consideration and their respect for the non-science aspects of environmental crisis. They think that every aspect of environmental crisis cannot be quantified or cannot be scientized. So another common understanding or common aspect of all these debates is that, like if you take, if we ask what, Wal Plumwood does, she coined the term ecocracy. So ecocracy means like the environmentalists or the world thinks that all environmental decisions are taken by environmentalists who are working as very, very rationally and very hyper rational scientists, and it is passed to the bureaucracy or to the government, and they are taking very rational decision, and everything is very clinically smoothly happening. So that people, you don't have to bother. Like the non-science establishments don't have to bother. It is a function of the science that environmental issue will be addressed and solved by the scientists, and you have to talk science. So that is what she calls as the ecocracy. It's a republic of science, scientists, and politicians. But in fact, there is no such ecocracy existing. It is not happening in a very rational, in a very, in a very consensual way. That is one aspect of it. And also, they are also contributing to the managerial strategies, not to any political strategies. And also, they are. And another major issue is basically, it keeps the people who are suffering from the environmental issues are away from the decision-making process. And also, those who are taking decisions on behalf of the environmental crisis are those who are very far away from the environmental crisis. So this is the paradox of this, ecocracy that as Wal Plumwood explains. So she calls, these scientists and environmentalists as a Baconian benevolent despot, like who are so much, their science pride is helping them to take their decisions and so on. So the major issue she, proposes that, no technically based political intervention would alleviate, the issue, because generated and perpetuated by the same economic, scientific, and political institution that are called upon to solve them. That is a major issue she is explaining. So, but actually, the political ecology scholars, as I mentioned, they take inspiration from social theory, especially, the scholarly debates on, for instance, post-colonialism of Edward Said, and what they call as post-colonial environmentalism is also inspired from the post-colonial theory. And they say that, environmentalism is a further form of, colonialism that is hidden under the neutral appearance of scientific evidence. And they want that, like, if we buy the colonial explanation of environmental crisis, there is an environmental risk. So you have to have your own indigenous different ways of understanding the environment. If we buy the scientific notion of environmental explanations, that is taking you to the danger. So that is some of the warning they are giving. So they contest the normalizing power of the mainstream environmentalism. So that, so they critique this, that environmentalism is imposing a very single and narrow vision of truth. So actually, and also they deny the agency of the political agency of the colonized world. That is their major argument. However, there is also another criticism of the post-colonial environmentalism, especially from the Marxist corners, that this post-environmentalism, post-colonial environmentalism is also leading to a kind of a hyper-romanticized, a fetishized portrayal of the colonized. If colonialist, I mean, if a colonial environmentalism was denying the political agency of the colonized, the post-colonial environmentalism is also like portraying them as a very romantic kind of being. So this is another issue that especially the Marxist corners are leveling. That is also a very significant issue to be addressed. Anyway, anyhow, post-colonial environmentalism has contributed to the shaping up of a very, very key environmental approach called environmentalism of the poor. It has been proposed by John Martin and Salier. And Alier says that environmentalism of the poor theory is basically, it transposes post-colonial instances in the political economy framework. So Ali says that the northern economies, I mean the economies of the northern world are hugely dependent on the southern world. And so the risk of the production, of the risk of the industries has been transferred from the global north to global south. So the production for the hazardous production for the environmental, hazardous production for the global north is done by the global south. And also the resource, I mean, the raw material for their production is also tapped from the global south. That increases the environmental risk in the global south. And the fruit is gained by the global north. And this geopolitical imbalance is there, and that is major argument that the post-colonial environmentalists make. And also they say that, I mean, the way environmental questions have been shaped up in global south is far different from how it is shaped up in the global north. So if it is for instance, in the US, it has been shaped by the scientists and environmentalists. For instance, a place like India, it has been shaped by peasants or indigenous communities, or like for instance, Chipko. Like, we don't find any science or scientists in the forefront of that movement. So and also another very, very important strand is what we call as environmental justice movement, that is also been shaped up in the United States. So environmental justice framework says that there is a spatial logic to this, and it has been influenced by the spatial turn in social sciences, that environmental risks are distributed not equally across space. So that is their major argument. For instance, like you see, the hazardous, the polluting industries in the US are most often will be near to the residents of the settlements of the African Americans or Bain people. This is so this justice framework is also kind of leveling a profound criticism against the mainstream notion of environmentalism. And also it is a kind of, like if you take John Drizek says that it's a displacement problem, like, so if you take the arguments of political ecology or environmental justice or post-colonial environmentalists, so basically the environmental issues are not addressed or solved. It has been displaced like geographically or temporally, like from one place to another place. Like your production, you cannot produce you cannot produce any hazardous thing in the US, so you are displacing that to Africa or to the Asian countries, or you are transferring or displacing that to the future, or you're changing the medium, like from air pollution to water pollution. Ultimately, you are not solving it, you are just displacing it, right? Kind of. So these set of debates basically focus uh, on the possibility to reconsider its socio-cultural and even eventually ethical contributions. So and also these are offering fresh insights to look at human-environmental relationship. But the issue is like it doesn't overcome the dichotomous portrayal of human and nature. So like if we just take the scholars, that I'm going to present, Latour, Eder, and Bluthorn, like environmental. So one of their premise is that they understand environmental crisis not as a technical crisis; it is a crisis of modernity itself. Right. So they say that the very understanding of nature and its social representations are to be contested if you want to have a meaningful way forward to the environmental crisis. Uh, so as we said, environmentalism is not much talking about the human environment relationship. The political ecology debate or the post-colonial environmentalism debate or the environmental justice debates are complicating the idea of human in the human environment relationship. But now it is a time that even you have to contest the idea of nature. In the human nature relationship, it is not only the human that is problematic. What do you understand as nature is also equally problematic, and it is by critiquing this idea of this universal single understanding of nature is one of the reasons for the ecological crisis. That is what the European scholars, these people like Latour is a French sociology, it's a philosopher basically, but I don't see his work much used in philosophy. Usually, like sociology people or literature people, these people are using his work these days. So, Klaus Herder is a German sociologist, and Brudun is an Austrian sociologist. So this Europe, they are also inspired from the critical theory, Frankfurt School tradition. So they are proposing a few things. So one major issue Latour proposes as a crisis of as a limitation of political ecology debates is that he says political ecology doesn't politicize ecology. It politicizes the society. It politicizes the people, but it doesn't politicize the nature or the ecology part of it. He says political ecology is not about politics and ecology. It is to be understood as a single unit. Political ecology as a single unit. And he says that, one thing he says that, the ontological foundations of both the categories, politics and ecology, restricts any coming together of these two. Because, as we know, politics is happening as an affair of democracy, mass movements, protests, campaigns, voting, elections, and so on. And ecology or science is happening altogether differently. Like it happens in laboratories, or it happens in like us by scientists, soft-spoken scientists who are not much about who always desire for objectivity. So how do you bring these fundamentally different things together is a question he is asking. And another thing he's saying is that ecology, you cannot take ecology as nature. So ecology is just one representation of the nature. You can have different kinds of representation of nature. As we discussed, you can have an aesthetic representation of nature. You can have a religious representation of nature. So the scientific representation of nature is one among them. That is also leading to another kind of relativism that we are not discussing it further. But again, we can take it for, we can value his argument that again, this is just one representation of nature. And in that, scientists or science is it's a third party, it's an intermediary between you and nature. You are not making sense of the nature. The scientist is making sense of the nature through sciences, and the scientist is giving you the scientific knowledge about nature, and it is through the science and scientists that you are making sense of the nature, and there is a middle person in between you and nature. He says but the radical movements bypasses this third party, and radical movements basically make sense of the nature directly. In that way, you can have a way out of this So this is some of the, like, basically this is conceptually we can, these arguments inspire us, like, like, and also his other works also, like We Have Never Been Modern, or his like his the very actor network theory is also inspiring us to have a different methodology to look at this. Another person I'm taking, I'm depending for this is Klaus Hader. So for Klaus Hader, he says that, like, he is also inspired from the post-structuralist tradition, and he says that the culture is important. Like, I mean the superstructure is important as the, like, it is not the base. So when you talk about environmental issues, the culture of nature is important. It is not about the environmental problem that is important. You have to shift your focus to the culture of it. And this, he says, the culture of nature in environmentalism is the same culture of nature that destructs the environment, or the same culture that he called the modern culture of nature, or like even at some instance he says the late modern culture of nature. So for one example he gives is that, vegetarianism is a cultural choice, but it has got a political agency, to win elections or to, to form government. So in that way, the culture is really important when you talk about environment also. And he says nature, the idea of nature is like it's culturally determined. And the mainstream environmentalism doesn't offer any alternative view of culture. It is the same view of nature that the industrial societies or the late modern culture of nature. The environmentalism is also depending the same idea of nature, and the current limits of the ecological reason, or the reasons that motivating the environmental agency are determined by the definition as nature as an object of human needs. So this is something he proposes. And if he Richard Bluedorn, so he presents, or he understands, he presents his theory as post-ecologism, and he says that, in post-ecology debates, the post-ecology debates doesn't go beyond, the ontological and epistemological foundations of environmentalism. He says, like, like he's also quoting Ulrich Beck, and he says that the crisis of ecological crisis is that you have to progress further, from the external nature. It is not about the environmental, the natural environment around you, but you have to go back to the human self and identity construction. So, and also you have to develop some cultural parameters for that. A major criticism he levels against environmentalism is that environmentalism doesn't offer any correct analytical framework or any analytical description about society. So, like, for instance, like, if you are a feminist, feminism gives you an idea to look at the world differently. Like, it gives an analytical description of the world, how the world is organized under the patriarchal notion. The same is with Marxism or Ambedkar, whatever. But environmentalism doesn't offer anything of that sort. It doesn't help you to look at the world in an advanced way. It cannot be used as an analytical category to make sense of the social world around you. And also the ideals that are able to lead human actions were too vague, and the program for political action is also never really convincing from a sociological perspective. We said that environmentalism has inspired other ideologies, but now the post-ecologists say that it is the other way around. That like, it is not environmentalism that is inspiring other ideologies. So environmentalism is succumbed to the dominant political, the dominant social political, framework of different contexts, different social and political contexts. So it shapes in like the way it shapes in for instance in Middle East, maybe far different from it shapes in Latin America. So it is not that capable to fight the dominant social and political frames in different societies. So these are some of the issues that Bluedorn proposes. So now the question is, like, how do these insights you take to look at context like in India? like where environmental sociologists have been doing their work depending on the scientific or the environmentalist explanation of the environmental crisis. Now, how do you have a sociological explanation of this? And to have more insight to this issue is something that the paper is looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit. It was a wonderful presentation. Now we will have our question answer session. So if anybody have any suggestions, doubts, questions, or anything based on the presentation, please you can ask or you can type in this comment box.
Hi, can I come in? Hello.
Yeah, I can hear. Please go on.
Hi. Thanks very much for detailing the various theoretical aspects and the trajectories of environmentalism. And my name is Soni. So I just want to ask. I mean, it's not a question, rather kind of larger concerns about some of the ways you have been articulating the idea of environmentalism. So I feel that conceptualizing environmentalism as a positivist paradigm is problematic. I mean, I understand that you have been trying to bring different aspects of that, but it's a fact that like environmentalism is used as an umbrella term where any action towards the betterment of society or betterment of the environment is counted. And it include, like you were mentioning, different institutionalized groups, whether it is urban society, Sierra Club, or how when we think about when it started, or it's not Greenpeace, such kind of thing. It also includes various individual actions where of conserving different kind of environment is happening, and ideology, cultural theory, etc. So, but I felt where the ambiguity comes here, maybe you correct me if I got you wrong, when you the usage of the terms or the understanding of terms environmentalism and environment, the way used it was, I feel it more like loosely and interchangeably. Environment as an object of analysis, I agree that it has been science oriented, and the understanding of environment per se was in more science terms, and some of the solutions which we have given to understand this environmental crisis was in terms of different techno-scientific terms. But when we go with environmentalism, I would say that it is a larger, obviously one thing, that ideology, and that is a movement which has a separate trajectory. And so I think if you make this separation, thinking in terms of thinking environmentalism and environment differently, and thinking that as a separate thing would have avoided that kind of kind of ambiguity there. And environmentalism always has been in different kinds of effort to resist the environmental degradation. This is one point. And the second, if should I go, or you want to respond?
Please go on.
Yeah, the second is about considering the political ecology and the environmental. Yeah, thanks. Environmental justice movement is separated from environmentalism. If you look at these disciplines, or slash I would call as movement, are inherently part of environmentalism. And if you now look at the latest work on political ecology work, or critical human geography, which draws from political ecology and the geography, and feminist political ecology work, these are the discipline which brings the Latour's idea of actor network theory, giving more prominence to the agency of human and non-human beings, and thinking how this interaction works and so on. Like we have a number of recent works, and especially the new social science vocabulary we use, the affective turn in social science and humanities, which basically incorporate these kind of ideas and start thinking about the nature, human, and the bridging space where, and they are drawing from Latour, but I'm saying that as a discipline, this has been becoming stronger and stronger. I stop there. Thanks. If you have any response, I think thanks very much for bringing this out, and maybe sometimes later I would like to have a one-to-one conversation with you.
I'm sorry, your second question wasn't clear to me. Could you please articulate it again?
No, the second I was talking about the separating. So when you are making the categorization, environmentalism has not been addressing the way it should be addressed sociologically, and you have been categorizing political ecology and environmental justice movement also as separate things which could not. It was only focusing on the human aspect and not the nature or the environment aspect. I would say that no, this is we cannot see it as a separate from environmentalism, one thing. Second thing is that these disciplines being an inherent part or as a movement, we can consider sometimes environmental justice and political ecology as a movement as well. They have been inherently a part of environmentalism. And if you see the recent works of political ecology, especially feminist political ecology, where they bring this bridging what you have been talking about, like humans, environment, and more prominence to the human agency, and not only human agency, the non-human agency, and thinking in terms of actor network theory based work of Latour and so on. I hope I could.
Yeah. So should I respond to this first, or like? I think, yeah, one or.
I think you can continue answering. It's not an issue. No, you can choose questions one by one. Solve it.
I actually, yeah, I partly agree with you on a few things, but one thing is that you said environment and environmentalism has got different trajectories. It has got different trajectories. So what I try to articulate is that, I mean, the way the idea of environment has been developed, like from a meaning of surrounding it, like it didn't have a green tone, like before 50s or before, even in the case of Kerala, you see, like environment is a new idea that has been introduced to people, these activists say that when they started speaking about paristhiti, you understand Malayalam, right? Yeah. So when they were talking about paristhiti, people confused that with paritastiti. So this is, so how does it get a green tonality, and how it is understood as part of a green project is very recently, by 60s and 70s. And then the word environment always carried a connotation that has very, very close connection with the mainstream environmentalism that has been shaped up in the US. That's what one response to that. Again, we can say that it has got different, it is just surrounding, even now we say that, the nurture and environment debates in biology or in psychology, in a different way we use that word. But what I meant by environment in this context is the environment of the environmentalists. So another thing is of course, there are people who consider, the political ecology tradition, or the or the environmental justice movement as integral part of environmentalism. That is a point, that is a position. But for analytical convenience, I take it as a different thing, because there are very, very, very significant differences in the approaches they extend about the social aspect of it. I didn't say that it is only about social. It is also about, definitely it is also about environment. I said, unlike the mainstream environmentalists understand as a social, they understood it as a hierarchical social. That is the one major difference. And how, I'm not much sure about if they are the object turn in social sciences, like how do you take cognizance of the non-living things, like in your sociological analysis. It's a different debate. I don't I don't know how much the environmental movements or the environmental thinking has been inspired from that. I'm not much sure about. Even Latour's work, I don't think it has been inspired much. Of course, feminist geography and feminist movements, of course, that has been definitely influenced. But I'm not much sure about Latour's work or the object. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Ranjith.
So, is there anyone else to ask questions? Anyway, I have something to say. For me, Ranjit, this is not a question or any suggestions, but my experience with eco-criticism or environmental studies, what we do with this academic subject in English literature. So for me, we learn essays, I mean theoretical essays and poems and literature, which represents the environmental concerns, and we have that kind of a relation with this one. And there are people who really take their research subject from this area. But after listening to your speech, after listening to your presentation, I have this doubt almost in my recent years, because uh, I am also concerned with this kind of environmental movements or environmental actions and activities. But when we go to this Google God, what we can call, we find it is a kind of politically motivated or ideologically, sometimes we can call manipulated movement sometimes. And it is so much visible that there is a kind of what we say a north south debate going on while we take environmentalism. So your presentation is a kind of what it really provoked me to think deep into this ecological movement or any kind of I loosely wording loosely using the word environmental ecology. Anyway, that movement. For me, it was actually not just for me. I think this is a popular concern when we talk about environmentalism. Most people, even those people who are not really into this movement, they took this whole movement as a kind of very spiritually activated process or very spiritual, very ethically right movement. But uh, the popular sense don't see what, or they are not I don't say that they're not ready see, but they can't see what is happening behind the curtain. But what is the play of power in it, what's the play of politics in it, what is the play of those big people who really what accelerates this world. So, and your presentation really made me to think that, and really forced me to think that. I'm really thankful to that. That's what I want to say. And it was really good presentation, excellent one. And is there any other questions or suggestions? I'm asking that again.
Thanks, Nazreen, for that comment. But also, I think you have to be a bit careful about your disciplinary orientation also. Like, I mean, you may have a different purchase of things, like in in the tradition of literature study, I mean, or cultural studies. Like I try to present a sociological way of looking at it. I think you can also have a different way of looking at it. But anyway, thanks. Yeah. So, and also, like, it is also important to be clear about our disciplinary, orientations, right? I mean, when we look at it, and also, like, yeah. So,
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
thank you. Yeah.
So I think you mentioned about post-colonial eco-criticism and criticism of it by Marxist critics. So I was just curious about if there is any Marxist view regarding ecology or environmentalism.
Uh, Definitely, there is, especially, there is a whole set of literature on this, like, of, if you have heard of this person, John Bellamy Foster, who is also the editor of this thing. So, Foster's main idea is basically, like one of the one of the Marxist understanding of ecological crisis is that, like, capitalism perishes. It's both the contributors of capitalism, be it like the primary contributor, the labor, and the secondary contributor, the nature or the natural world. So it perishes both. It perishes the labor as well as so, like, so Foster advances the idea of metabolic drift. And he says that in classical Marxism, you would see a way of addressing this issue long back from the Marx writing itself. So that is a tradition, and you find, and again, like people like James O'Connor, and his work basically says that you have to address both the. I mean, like, it's not only the primary and secondary contradictions together. Like what happened in USSR, that you gave importance to the labor aspect of it, you didn't give importance to the nature aspect of it. And his scholarship, we call it as, eco-socialism. So, and there are many, like for instance, John Clark, his works are coming from the US context. So you just follow monthly review, and they have all these kinds of scholarship about the Marxist way of comprehending the environmental crisis. Definitely there is, yeah. And from Indian context, like people like, for instance, Archana Prasad or Amita Bhaviskar, they link the class question with the environmental. They say that, like the post-colonial environmentalists, like, for instance, Ashish Nandi or Ramachandra Guha or Claude Alvarez, their work is also very much a kind of, they present a very romantic representation of the India. And also that is very much close to the fascist political regime of the present political conditions. Yeah, so there are.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any more questions? I think there's no more questions, and I think we could wind up the session, right?
Yes, Nasrin, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
perfect.
So,
Yeah.
okay, Ranjit. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, Ranjit. So, and we hope you that it was a wonderful presentation for sure. And we hope that you will be invited to many other presentations like this. And we would like to hear more from you and learn different aspects of the of this academic discipline. And thank you all. Thank you for joining the meeting. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. See you later.